Elan Journo here at the Ayn Rand Institute. Ayn Rand's novel The Fountainhead was a bestseller. The story's hero, Howard Rourke, has inspired legions of fans, and today the book is taught in English classes nationwide and in many countries around the world. A movie based on The Fountainhead, starring Gary Cooper, was released in 1949, 70 years ago. And the story of how the movie was made and how it came about is itself fascinating and dramatic. And to discuss that, I'm joined by Dr. Shoshana Milgram, an expert on Ayn Rand's life and writings. Shoshana, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me. Let me introduce you briefly for our listeners and viewers. Dr. Milgram is an associate professor of English at Virginia Tech. She specializes in narrative fiction and film, and she teaches on those subjects. Her scholarship includes introductions to Victor Hugo's novels, a study of Ayn Rand's life up to 1957, and articles on Dostoevsky, George Eliot, Nabokov, and others. And I'll add that Shoshana has contributed to this series of books called Essays on Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. There's one on Anthem. I don't have the one handy on The Fountainhead, but you contributed to essays on Ayn Rand's We the Living and The Fountainhead. I think these are all essays that are outstanding, and I recommend that people pick them up. And more recently, Shoshana contributed a chapter to a book called Companion to Ayn Rand, which is, again, on Ayn Rand's life. And it's a really excellent and thoroughly researched account. So I'm excited to talk about the movie and the making of the movie. And I know you've spoken about this in various settings. So I thought a good place to start would be, many people who write novels, I think, would jump at the chance to sell the movie rights to their work. Now, I'm curious, what was Ayn Rand's view of the opportunity to sell the rights to The Fountainhead? What was she hoping to do with that? And what's sort of the story there?
Okay, well, it's a good question because in a sense, there would appear to be something of a contradiction. She wrote the novel all by herself, and she had recently had a not very good experience in the 30s with her play Penthouse Legend, when that was done as a play the night of January 16th. She had legal proceedings against the people doing it and so on. And, this is the author of The Fountainhead. No interference, my work. And by the nature of things, a film was going to involve other people. The other side of the story, though, there are several sides, is that she'd always been interested in films. She was interested in films when she was growing up in Russia, and for a period when she was going to film school, which she did after she got her degree in history at the university, she had passes to see lots of films, and she took full advantage. She would even go to see a film she liked several times. She also did her first published writing about films, and she published in a series. And I don't have the Paul Negri that she wrote, but I have other books that look like it. This is the Harold Lloyd, and this is someone else's Paul Negri, little books. They've been translated and printed in facsimile in a book called Russian Writings on Hollywood by Ayn Rand. So, this is her first published writing. And she even had the idea, before she absolutely resolved on coming to the States, that she might remain in Russia and get her ideas into films in a subtle way. I think that would have been a little risky for her. Very risky for her. She made the same conclusion. But the fact that she even thought about it, that this might be a way to present her ideas, shows that she was alive to the possibilities of the medium and very interested in that. She also used the idea of learning about films as part of her explanation for why she wanted to go to the United States. And she said she was going to go to the United States, she was going to learn about making movies, and then presumably return to make movies as Lenin wanted people to do. Now, of course, she didn't have any intention of coming back and making movies for the Soviet state, but she did want to learn, and the United States was making the best movies. She went there. She stayed with relatives in Chicago, one of whom owned a movie theater, and she used her time well. And then off she went to Cecil B. DeMille, where she did get a job working for him as a junior screenwriter and learned about making movies right on the set. So she'd always been interested in movies, and she did some treatments. She had sold the film rights for some screen treatments, which gave her the money to quit her job working in the wardrobe. So she was alive to the possibilities, even though she often noticed that the possibilities were not fulfilled. And this was frustrating to her, that Hollywood did not make the most of the opportunities that it could with films. Well, after she wrote her play, and then she went to New York to see it produced on Broadway, and she completed With a Living, and that was being filmed and so on. She's now working on, well, With a Living was filmed without her permission, but it was published. She's now dedicated herself to writing The Fountainhead, spent a full amount of time on it, is satisfied with the work, and she even thought to herself, well, if this book doesn't make my reputation, I don't know what will, because she was satisfied that she had created her ideal man. She had presented him in a good story. It was literarily excellent. It was her own work. Not that her other work wasn't her own work, but that it was her own voice. She later said that With a Living had a bit too much of the voice of her favorite novelist, Victor Hugo, but The Fountainhead was all hers. She was satisfied. And yet, even though it was selling, it was not selling as well as she would have liked. And this is where we get into the movie rights story, because it was rising on the bestseller list. However, the reviews had not been perceptive. The reviews had not necessarily called attention to the right characteristics of the story and of the hero and of the theme to reach the readers she wanted to reach. And she spoke with the publisher. She complained or made suggestions for the ads, and they told her they were the experts, and she did not think that they were such experts. So she herself was going out and trying to talk to business people to get money to advertise The Fountainhead in a better way. This was not a lot of fun, trying to persuade businessmen, people she'd met through the Wanda Wilkie campaign, that this philosophical book was in support of them and of the kind of work they did and of the freedom needed to do it. She made a deal with her publisher that she would take a lower level of royalties in order for them to do a better job of publicizing the book. You know, yeah. They would want to do that anyway. But as she said, she would have taken 0 royalties if they would do a better job of publicizing the book. So this was a factor for her, because she'd written the book. Now the audience needed to find it, and she couldn't force people to read it. She needed to plant enough seeds and to bring it to the attention of enough people so that the right kind of readers would find it. Well, that's where the movie deal came in. Because when she got the offer from Warner Brothers, and it was, as she said, someday the rights would be worth a lot more than $50,000, but that if she took less, she would think that she had not done enough for the book. Now she had money of her own to advertise the book if she wanted. The movie itself would advertise the book all by itself, because she was expecting the movie to come out not 6 years later as it did, but closer in time. And even if it was not a successful movie, and even if it was not an excellent movie, even a movie that is a relative flop is seen by a lot of people, and word of mouth, people would find out about it. Then, in addition, there was the fact that she was being invited as part of the deal to come out and do some work, you know, to do the screen treatment and then to do a full screenplay. So she would have some input, even though she knew that she wouldn't be able to do as much as she might like, and as she had seen from other movies she had worked on when she was in Hollywood before, you can never control. She had a really interesting experience while she was working for DeMille in giving ideas, and some of her ideas would show up, but the whole movie would not reflect what she'd had in mind. So she said there were no guarantees. There were no guarantees, but they wanted it. There'd be the money, there'd be the advertising, and she, well, as she thought about it, she would have the money also to buy her time to write her next book, which she already had in mind. She already had in mind the book that became Atlas Shrugged. So overall, this seemed to be a reasonably good idea. She was concerned it was a risk. On the other hand, it was a risk worth taking for the sake of the Fountainhead.
So I wanted to pick up, sorry, I just want to pick up on what you said, that there was a 6-year period. So she thought it would come out much sooner than it did, and that she was involved in the writing. So maybe you can just sort of paint a picture of what was her involvement, how much did she do in terms of writing the script? And because you said there's a treatment, and I think that's like a preliminary to a script. Just sketch a picture for us.
Okay, well, it's going to be a picture that involves delays. And of course, that's true of the experience for Ayn Rand. What she did initially was, a treatment explaining what elements of the story would have to be there. And this was traditional because often writers who were experts at writing fiction could not imagine how to translate that story into film. Now she could, because she planned to write films. So she thought visually, she thought in terms of a story that you can tell in a few hours. So this was something she could do, and she did. Now, I don't think I could tell you without writing down the numbers and dates, but the story was something like this. They liked what she had done and hired her basically to do a full script. The full script, which took some time to do, she delivered it in, I think, nine deliveries, was close to 300 pages. 300 pages is way too long, but this was a way of giving dramatic life to the story. And she had such wonderful ideas that I would love to see that movie. She wanted to start with the Manhattan Bank building. Okay, that's a very dramatic scene. And if you understand what's going on in the scene of the Manhattan Bank building, you get a very good introduction to Rourke. Now, as if you've seen the movie, you know that the movie begins much earlier. And that decision came about much later, partly because the Hollywood filmmakers were accustomed to the idea that you need to start the movie the way the book starts, so that the audience will feel that they're seeing the same work. Now, one factor, of course, is that we had to have a younger Rourke at a younger point, et cetera, et cetera. But her idea was to start with a scene of high conflict. And she had all sorts of visual equivalents for story points. And she had one of my favorite episodes in the novel. She had the Stoddard Temple, which I think is splendid dramatic material and potentially splendid visual material. But it was way too long. So there was some, what she said when she met Henry Blanke was that she was very impressed with him, and that he appeared to be enthusiastic about the book, and that he admired it, and that everything she did, he said, was wonderful. And so she was very pleased with this, that she was not getting philosophical disagreement, she was not getting artistic disagreement. And yet, what with the war and budgets and so on, it looked as if it wasn't going to be possible to do the film right away. And meanwhile, something else had happened that to her was very interesting. She had been invited to help with another movie being made in Hollywood at that time. It was called The Conspirators. And she was asked because the director of the film knew her work and thought that she might be able to contribute. Now, that's very flattering, that she has never done film writing with her credit on the screen, and yet he knows from the way that she writes The Fountainhead that she can help. Well, and he'd had many different screenwriters, too many to even be in the credits, working on it, and none of them had quite succeeded, so maybe Ayn Rand will help. Now, if you look in the archives, you can see pages that she wrote, and she did wonderful writing, and she was able to take a story that wasn't her kind of story and to write good scenes for it. However, the production on The Conspirators was a big mess. And in the course of the time Hal Wallis was producing, walked and set up his own studio. The actors were somewhat unhappy. And The Conspirators has some resemblances to Casablanca without being as strong a story or as strong a film as Casablanca is. And so in the end, she didn't even want to basically tell people that she had anything to do with it because it wasn't her film. However, what she got was the notion that she could write scenes, and also she had the contact with Hal Wallis. And Hal Wallis was impressed with her ability, setting up on his own, and he was willing to make for her the kind of deal she wanted. It almost sounds like a I don't know, a Greek myth or something, that she could spend half the year doing her own work and half the year working for the studio. Kind of like Proserpina and Hades and Pluto and all that. Okay. And this was the kind of contract that people didn't usually do, but he was willing to do it to get her to work. So now she's got a deal with money coming in, experience writing for films, and time on her own to do her own work. And so in a sense, she wanted the Fountainhead to get filmed, but it wasn't as if, all right, if this isn't happening, I might as well go back to New York. She had work to do, and work that was purposeful and was related to her artistic purposes. She still liked the idea of what films could do, even though she always said she loved New York and never intended to settle permanently in California. So as the years go on, there were other drafts of the script, and she's getting it down in size, but still retaining the Stoddard Temple. And then we get all the way to 1948. And that's when she started hearing rumors about the film going back into production. And I think Mervyn LeRoy had been mentioned as director at one point, but now it's King Vidor. During this time, as we found out afterwards, the studio had also brought in other writers to write Fountainhead scripts without telling her. And you didn't have the book with you, but this book, Essays on Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, has a very good article by Jeff Britting in which he talks about he's gone and taken a look at those other scripts, which are terrible. I mean, I think they're actually bad as scripts and bad as Fountainhead scripts. Anyway, but who knows what they were thinking. And King Vidor did not, when he was interviewed, he did not remember this as part of the history, but I think the memory was kind to him. And Ayn Rand got herself back on the film, involved with it. She couldn't make casting decisions, but she could make recommendations. She, of course, was very happy with the idea of Gary Cooper. She would have liked Barbara Stanwyck, who was a friend of hers, as Dominique, and King Vidor, who had used her, but he did not think she was appropriate. So she didn't have a say, but she did have input in making the script that we're now going to use. And now we're getting down to business. And now we've got a director. And now we're getting a cast together. And if you go over to the Warner Brothers collection, you see that the world was interested in the making of this movie. You've probably heard the stories about many actresses who wanted to play Dominique and had parties, pretended to dress up as her, imitated her hairdo and so on. But even the part of Peter Keating was something that there was a fan club in which people were recommending him to be Peter Keating. Now, what does that tell you? That there was a collection of letters in which people were suggesting I couldn't believe it. People who were suggesting Peter Keating. So there was quite a bit of interest in the making of this film. And from Ayn Rand's perspective, she wanted to protect the script. So she's working with Vidor, who's going to have to direct it. She's working with Blanky, who's producing it. It's looking pretty good in that they have not raised objections to the ideas. They have made suggestions, such as we need to start earlier so the audience will understand. The scene with the calendar pages flying off. This is not really Ayn Rand's style, but she didn't think that it would destroy anything in Rourke's character. She didn't like the scene of Cameron on the street. She was persuaded, or she saw herself, that it made sense to bring Wynand in earlier, because even in her own first script, which had so much before, she did emphasize the big conflict and excitement in the fourth part of the novel. So it made sense to bring in Wynand earlier, and she was willing to do that. And essentially, she thought of this as a time of cooperation, working together, doing a good job, being prepared to make a film that was going to be unconventional and possibly original. Those two things aren't necessarily the same, but that was good. And she thought she tried to make it clear to them that they couldn't just do formula on this film. Now, I have a bunch of scripts. Some of them are in the Ayn Rand archives, and some of them are up at the University of Wisconsin. And so collected them, gone through them and so on. And part of what I see is that she keeps trying to make the story dramatically convincing and to preserve what she saw as the important thematic elements. And she wrote about, what's important, the theme of integrity and the specific theme of Rourke's independence. And so, well, the whole novel is about those things, but she emphasized them in her scripts. Now, when we get to the very end, there was a little problem in that she was working every day with Blanky and Vidor and going through it, and one of them got sick, and this slowed them down, it's going to interfere with the process. She said, I'm happy to keep working even without being paid. And she had told Vidor that she would be happy to consult without being paid. And if you have any questions, I'll come and I'll sit around and do my own work and wait for you to ask me. Or you can call me up and I'll tell you what to do. So she made it very clear that her interest in remaining involved with the film had to do with her work and with making this a good film, not with being on the clock as far as getting paid. You might remember that in the Fountainhead, when Rourke sees that he himself has made a mistake with the Sanborn house, he'll fix that at his own expense because it's the house and he wants it to be right. So that was the attitude she took toward the script, that she wanted it to be right. And she didn't have a written agreement that she would be consulted for every single change, but she had been given Vidor's word, and especially given her generous offer, she took that to be important and honest. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to pause for a minute before we get to how the film was actually the final product and what, because I know what's coming. I've heard you speak on it, but I want to just pause for a minute to give people some context on. So at the time in Hollywood, if you were making a movie, correct me if I got the facts wrong, but there was an organization called the Johnson Office, or it was sometimes called the Production Code, I think. And they became a factor in the making of the Fountainhead. And just, if you could briefly tell us, what was this organization or body, and how did it impact the making of the Fountainhead? Because I think it's really enlightening.
Well, that came about even after all these things that I've been talking about, because first they had to get the story right, and then they had to, as one did, had to submit the script to this office, and then after the film was made, they had to submit the script, they had to submit the finished film to this office. And the papers of this organization are available. I think there are a lot of them in the Margaret Herrick Library. And they had lists of certain things that they cared about. They did not, for example, want someone to commit a crime and escape with impunity. If there was any sort of sexual activity outside marriage, there needed to be consequences for that. So that's a reason why they call it a code. It wasn't simply a code of laws, but it was a code of conduct, or a moral code, or a religious code, or a social code. And, or if too much flesh was exposed, that would be of interest, or if a word had a double meaning, that would be a matter of concern. As you probably know, there were some directors who were very good at submitting scripts that did not seem to be problematic. And when the film was completed, Lubitsch had managed to suggest something that you might not have seen in the script, and that they would have trouble pointing to, and they might not even understand. It might even, well, of course, with the Soviets, you could get into a lot more trouble if you offended them. You can end up Siberia and so on. But with the Johnson office, it was a matter of trying to get their approval while still telling the story that one wanted to tell. Now, in the case of the Fountainhead, they had a number of concerns. The office did. They were concerned not just with what is sometimes called the rape scene with Rourke and Dominique, but also with Dominique and Wynand. Okay, what exactly is Dominique offering to do with Wynand? And people who read the book sometimes look at the movie and think that the movie has told you or shown you what you remember from the book. But if you're looking at the movie from the standpoint of, if you didn't know the book, would you has she actually made such and such an offer? No, and not to mention Winans' colorful past, et cetera, et cetera. So those two things were of concern and needed to be dealt with. And the clothing and the postures and all that sort of thing. And then in addition, we had the philosophical issues, especially those that were explicit in Rourke's speech. So there were many, many meetings. And Ayn Rand was not required to be involved because after all, she's not the director, she's not the producer, but I think they knew that Ayn Rand could explain things better than they could. And of course, as you can imagine, Ayn Rand would not want a decision to be made, especially the wrong way, without her having had a chance to have input. And she describes some of these circumstances in letters and in the biographical interviews she did with Barbara Brandon in 61, I think, was when she would have been talking about this episode in her life. But she, all these years later, remembered vividly how these discussions went and how the objection was made that the speech was materialist. And she said, well, but Winan talks about the spirit. And they said, no, that's not the speech that's the problem. It's this other one. That's the problem. And she said, well, where do you see an attack on the soul here? It's all about the soul. And then, well, how about selfish? Does that mean that you murder anybody? No. And then she would explain that. And then it was commented, well, this doesn't agree with Catholic doctrine. And she knew she had them there because what? First of all, how about Thomas Aquinas? And the person who was supposed to be the expert didn't know much about Thomas Aquinas. And Ayn Rand says, well, this is what Thomas Aquinas said, and this is what Aristotle said, and this is what I say. And he had nothing further to say on the subject of Aquinas. And then she said, are you really saying that this film needs to conform to Catholic doctrine, which of course they couldn't say. And she had to talk to Gary Cooper's lawyer, who was concerned that if Gary Cooper expressed certain sentiments that his audience would think that he subscribed. And she said, well, look what he's saying. And this is good. And if he doesn't have the chance to say all of that in my own words, who knows what they're going to think about what Gary believes. So she wrote the speech. She wrote a shorter version. It's shorter than what you see in the novel of the speech, but she was accustomed to that anyway. She had certainly worked on shortening the speech while she was writing it for the novel. And she had produced a smaller version of it for the comic strip version of the Fountainhead. And when Omnibooks, without her permission, did an abridged version, she said, well, I could have done the abridgment for you. I could do that. So she knew that different settings might benefit from a shorter version. It wasn't as if it couldn't be shortened, but it had to be shortened by her. And she did that. She shortened it. She explained things. She talked to the Johnson office. She talked to Gary Cooper's lawyer. She talked to the studio. And at one point, the studio told her, you can make it a little longer. Just put back in all those things you explained so well at the meeting, and that'll make it a good speech. So she really, as she said, it was what she saved her thunder for, because the calendar with the pages flying off, she could give up on that. The casting being not ideal, she could give up on that. But the speech was very, very important, and she did not want to give up on that. And so, many, many different versions of the speech just by itself were part of the process of doing the film The Fountainhead.
So just for people, some of the viewers may not have finished the book or may not have read it yet. And so this is the pivotal speech that Howard Rourke, the hero of the story, gives when he's in court to defend himself. I'm not going to try to give away, I'll try not to give away anything in the story, but he's accused of a crime and he has to defend himself in court. And this is the pivotal speech that articulates sort of the ideas behind his vision of life and art and the integrity that's important in his work. So we're kind of at a pivotal, kind of at a climactic point in the story of the making of the movie. So we've seen the struggles Ayn Rand had in terms of how long it took to get to the movie making, and her input into the script, and her desire to keep a kind of integrity to the story. And then we've seen the Johnson office. So it's clear that she was really committed to having a kind of coherence to the movie, that it would be true to the book in an important way, not one-to-one kind of to the theme, but emphasizing certain elements from the book. So given all the effort she put into it, what ended up happening with the final version? What did she think of it?
Okay, of the speech or
of the movie as a whole?
The movie as a whole. Okay, well, the movie as a whole, I think it was, ultimately, she thought that it was not as good as it could have been. However, considering how bad it could have been, she had managed to protect the speech, with the exception of one line, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. She also had input even after the film was filmed, in terms of, looking at the rushes and suggesting cuts and so on. And so if she was comparing what's finally being shown versus how bad it could have been, it's going to look better than that. What's out there on the screens is going to look good, and it's something she can defend. Because when Balsy Crowther wrote a stupid negative review for the New York Times, she wrote back, and her response was, it was called, the response was called, Ayn Rand defends her film. And so she thought of this as her film, and she quoted from Rourke's speech, and she was willing to get behind it. Now, she almost, when there was a certain controversy, which I'll also have to tell you about, in the shooting of that scene, she had threatened to dissociate herself from the film. So, and that's, again, part of why, from her point of view, she knew how much worse it could have been. And here it is. Gary Cooper tried. She coached him. They used her words, even if they didn't use all of her words. It's her words up there on the screen. The speech is almost completely the way that she wanted it. So considering all of that, it was a movie with money behind it. It could have been a lot worse. On the other hand, she was very critical of the acting of many of the actors. And that was a way in which she had some input in the final cutting of the film, because she said, well, we should cut off a little sooner here. He doesn't say that line very well, so let's cut it off right here. And you can see that by looking at the script. She also would have liked Frank Lloyd Wright to design the models, the buildings, and she'd been in discussion with him. She thought it was set. That's a long story too. In the end, he said no, and someone less adequate did models. And she said, let's not spend too much time looking at them. And indeed, the film doesn't spend too much time looking at them. Although, of course, in the days of DVDs, you can push pause. And there they are in all their non-glory. So the acting was something of a disappointment. The style was something of a disappointment. The models were something of a disappointment. And the script, of course, was not as good, even though she wrote it, as the script she'd originally planned. You mentioned about the speech at the trial, and just to give people some context, when one reads the novel, there is an earlier trial, and there is a way in which Rourke defends himself there, which you can see what it is. And well, the question is, what is he going to do this time? You see, so she's built in a nice tension. Is he going to do the same thing? No, he's got something else to do, because he's learned something. He's learned something about an important issue that was in his mind back in the beginning of the novel. And now he has an answer to a question that he had then. So it's a very interesting speech, because in a way he's speaking to the world, because he has committed the crime here, not only for the result, but so that he would have a chance to make a statement. And he's speaking to the jury, which he's picked out with the people with the hardest faces. And he's speaking to people in the audience, including a dear friend. So it's a speech that has to work on many levels, but it's also a speech to himself, because he's naming something he didn't know at the beginning of the novel, and possibly did not know at the time of his other trial. So it's a really great dramatic moment. And the way that it was filmed, which I think worked, since for Gary Cooper, that was a lot more words than he'd ever had to say at one time before. It's filmed with cuts from him to various people in the audience, as Ayn Rand had planned. And I think that that was a good way of doing something that a film could do, because you wouldn't do that in a text, but you could do it in a film and then go back to him. And it was also a good way of coping with Gary Cooper's limits, what he could do and what he was doing. He was trying, what he could do and what he couldn't do. So it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse. And yet she said, and I will tell you the story about the filming of the speech and of the missing line. It did make her reluctant to have anything to do with Hollywood in the future. In other words, it wasn't, okay, well, that went pretty well, let's see if we can make it better. It was, oh, what a headache. I would, and even though she did make deals for Atlas Shrugged, but she thought long and painfully about that first. Okay, now the story about the filming of the speech, and this is a story that she tells in a letter that has just been put up online.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put links to it in the show notes.
Right, it was not, it's a kind of legal statement that was not included in the letters of Ayn Rand, but I think it's very interesting reading. And in brief, what happened is that after all that fuss, and after all that back and forth and offices and cutting and so on, and Vidor agreeing to involve her in any changes, she arrived on set to find a truncated version of the speech being shot midstream. And that, from her point of view, was the worst, because leaving out the deeper philosophical justification misrepresented Rourke. And if they felt that they needed to cut it for time, let her do the cutting. And here what they've done is almost as if, now what Vidor said is he wanted to shoot it as a protection shot, but I think he probably felt he needed some protection after he found out and Ayn Rand said she didn't raise her voice, she didn't want to cause trouble on the set, but she was not going to leave until this matter got resolved, and she goes upstairs and she speaks and so on, and in the end the edict came down that it was to be done as planned. But she said, if you release that as you filmed it, I will tell my fans and I will tell everyone who admires the Fountainhead that this book betrays it, and you don't want that, which I'm sure they didn't want. So she managed, it's hard to know. I mean, that's a direct question that, as far as I know, King Vidor was never asked in print, or in a recording, what happened that day? And his memories of the film, when he was interviewed years later, are always very positive. Especially, they got even warmer with time. He said, I could die happy knowing I did that film. I really did a good job. Okay? Well, Ayn Rand didn't necessarily think that he did the best job, but he didn't say, oh boy, what a turkey. Or I think that Raymond Massey even left it out of his memoir. Just saying. Okay, but King Vidor did not have that attitude toward the film, and yet I don't think anyone ever asked him what happened that day. Okay, so we don't know. At least I don't know. And I don't know anyone else who does know. Now, the other problem that happened was that sometime between the first preview and the opening, the line, I came here to say that I'm a man who does not exist for others, was dropped. And Ayn Rand said that she tried to find out who was responsible. It wasn't clear. It wasn't clear how it happened, where the line had gone. And at one point she said, well, we should get Gary Cooper back in here to record if we don't have it. Put it back in. And I won't forgive Warner Brothers unless they put the line back in, and maybe not even then. Because that wasn't, I think it's important, even though, as she said, the whole speech says it, but that she wanted Rourke to say it because that, in fact, is what he wanted to say. And he said it with his action, and he says it in words, which is not his normal meaning. Does things visually and in action, but here he's saying in words what his action means, and that line was gone, and that after everything, that was a problem for her, and I don't blame her, because it's one thing if people don't make promises and you know you're taking risk, and it's another if you say I'm willing to work without charge, just ask me, I'll help, I'll shorten it, I'll make it right, and let me explain it, don't just do it without telling me. And they even shot it, and then after all of the, and then she even sees it sit, and then after all of that, it's yanked, as if she's not going to notice. As if she's not going to notice. I mean, it's almost insulting her intelligence that they could take out that line and get away with it. So that was troubling to her, and that was offensive, and whoever did it, I don't know, who was responsible, how it happened. It bothered her. And I guess in years to come, sometimes there were prints circulated that were not complete.
Of the movie? Of
the movie. When she went to Lewis and Clark to get an honorary degree, somehow they got a print of the movie that was not complete. And I don't know myself exactly what this botched print looks like, but she was not happy about that. And it appears that it was inadvertent. And I don't think I've ever seen television, but of course television, they can cut things for commercial breaks and so on. So I'm not an expert on exactly what's wrong with the print, and I hope maybe they've just gotten rid of them. But that was one more little adventure that I'm sure that from her point of view is, okay, what are they going to think of next? And look what happened to my film. But it was still her film for the New York Times.
And I wanted to, before we close, just to circle back on one thing and then ask you a question. So one of her motivations was to find her kind of reader for the book. And from what I've read and heard of you, that it did help get the book more attention. It pushed it back into higher sales. So in that sense, she accomplished what she wanted, even though there were imperfections and things that she thought were inadequate. Now, you teach about film, and I know you're a film buff. We've talked a lot about films in various contexts. I'm curious about your assessment of the Fountainhead movie, given also that you know the book very well. So how do you think of it, and what's your experience watching it?
Okay, well, it's a good question. It's also a hard question, because since I love the book and I know the book, I have to take the book out of my head to see the film as a film in itself, and then I can bring the book back and see it as an adaptation. So looking at the film as a film in itself, there are a number of things that are very impressive to me. I think that visually there are some very impressive sequences. The first sequence they filmed, the quarry, that's very powerful, and her and him and the faces and so on. I think that's the music might be a bit overwrought, but just visually it's a very dramatic contrast. I love the visuals in Winans' office. In fact, that vista reminds me of a vista in an office in the film Metropolis, the Fritz Lang movie. And Fritz Lang was a favorite of hers, and Henry Blanke even worked on that film. So it's not, I don't know if he was responsible for that, but it looks good. And it's a good setting for a Winand, if not necessarily for this Winand. So I like the handling of the shadows. I like the way that the rooms are often just spare and bare, and it's as if the people are so much more important than the settings in which we see them. And even though I like her own words, there's a sense in which the film might almost work better as a silent. If somehow you had the words and you knew what was going on, but you've got words and you've got the scenes without these particular actors who can't always handle the words well, having to say them. So I think that's what I would think if I did not know the novel and I were just thinking, watching this one, I said, wow, look how good this looks. look how dramatic these scenes are. And I think that the actors have good faces, and they're trying. I think that Gary Cooper, who is a good actor, this is not quite in his range. I've always liked Gregory Peck, and if you've seen Gregory Peck in The Big Country, wonderful movie, and he's playing a character who, in his integrity, is something like Rourke. So I think if I were seeing this movie again, just as a movie, I might think, well, let's see now. How old was Gregory Peck? Can we put Gregory Peck into this movie instead? Because he's got, you know, the dignity and the seriousness and the pacing. And hey, To Kill a Mockingbird showed he could handle a long trial speech. Yay! Yeah. So I think that's what I would think, that Gary Cooper's got a good look, but at this age and with his skills at that point, he's not as good as Gregory Peck would have been in that role. So I think those would be some of my observations in looking at it as a film. Now, I think I would have noticed, again, just from looking at other films, that we've got a fair number of kind of familiar character actors in there, people I've seen in other movies, and that they're speaking somewhat more sharply than I'd be used to seeing them in other movies. So there's something of a more stylized speech in the film, and of course part of that is that they are speaking Ayn Rand's words, but that's interesting. These are people who are not slurring their speech, and these are people who are not making up the words as they go along, but that they have a kind, even the bad people, even the woman I caught my cook reading Winans paper, so I fired her. You know, even statements like that are just a little tighter and better than one might see in other 40s films. Okay, now if I scoot over and start thinking of it as an adaptation of The Fountainhead, I notice that a key element in The Fountainhead is Rourke's joy in his work, and this is not a key element in the film. Okay, Rourke's intransigence and his independence and his ability to withstand challenges, I see that. But the joy in his work, I would like to see that. I mean, she'd written this Enright House scene that I don't think was filmed. You know, it was even there for the late script. I don't think that was filmed. And I think that would have conveyed it. For whatever reason, this Howard Rourke doesn't enjoy his work as much as the real Howard Rourke enjoyed his work. And I think that's very important. And there are other ways in which just the characters are not quite on target for who they're supposed to be. Now, Ayn Rand complained that the Toohey performance by Douglas was a good actor, it's a good performance, but that he's too tough. And indeed, the actor, when interviewed, said strong. Well, Toohey is someone who gives the impression maybe of varied strength that comes out when he delivers his rant. But when he talks about, he says, like cement under his breath. I think this Toohey, not only because in the script he is placed in the Manhattan Bank building scene, and with the smoke and so on, is stronger, and that's well, maybe it's a different character and it's a different film, but it's not the way that I think of Toohey from the novel, and I think it's important for us to have a real Toohey. From Ayn Rand's point of view, she's concentrating on the last part, so it's important to have a good Winans and Dominique and a good triangle. But Toohey's the antagonist in a way that Peter Keating isn't. And beating Peter Keating, that's not much of a challenge. He can beat himself, but Toohey is the opposite. And so I think he's a very interesting character to read and to think about. And although, as Rourke says, but I don't think of you. but the reader does. And so I think that's something of a deficiency. I would like to say one other thing, though, just and think of it as an adaptation, which is that Ivo van Hove, the director, has done a 4-hour stage version of Fountainhead. And in 4 hours, you can get a lot more of the story. People might quarrel with some of his choices, but I think some of the choices are very, very good. And I think it's a very respectful treatment of the Fountainhead. It's a respectful treatment of Rourke's speech, and it's a respectful treatment of Toohey and Rourke as antagonists. I think that's very interesting. And of course, I don't know Dutch, but I know the Fountainhead well enough that I didn't have to look at the super titles, and I could see that practically it was very, very close to the novel, and in a lot of, and of course it had the Stoddard Temple in it too, which was quite delightful. And I was the story with Ivo van Hove is that he discovered the novel a few years ago, and a working friend gave it to him and said, you should read this book, and he read it, and he was very impressed with it. And he was impressed with Rourke as an artist and independent and a creator and so on. And as he says in an interview, he thought, well, I would like to do this. He said, maybe I too could be Howard Rourke. Maybe I could do it today. Maybe that day should be today. And then he set out to get the rights and to adapt it. And I was planning to try to see it in the Netherlands. And I was looking into travel plans and how am I going to manage this and so on. When in the course of my trying to buy tickets, I entered English because I didn't want to buy tickets in a language I didn't know. And that's how I found out that it was from the musicians that it was coming to New York. So I went to New York, saw it 3 times from different vantage points. And overall, I took a lot of notes and I would have suggestions, but I liked a lot more than I disliked. And I hope Ayn Rand would have agreed. Now, it is a play. It's not a film, but he uses some of the aspects of film, and he takes the full 4 hours. I don't think it seems, to me at least, it didn't seem too long. And it was a long night in the theater, but I didn't. Eugene O'Neill feels a lot longer than that. Just saying. It feels a lot longer than that, even when it's only an hour and a half. I went 3 times, and the audience, as far as I could tell, at BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, I don't think most of them knew the novel. Just from the way they were reacting to it, it was not an audience of Ayn Rand fans. It was an audience, I think, of theater fans, and they were selling the novel, and people were lining up to buy it. So I thought that was interesting. I know the BAM audience, and it's only playing for a week. I don't think that's going to affect the bestseller status of the novel, which of course has been all these years. But I thought, this is good adaptation. This is respectful, and it's more powerful than disappointing. And I learned afterwards that Ivo has been thinking of doing a film of just the speech all by itself.
That would be powerful.
I think it could be. The fascinating thing about the actor he's chosen is that he does not look like Gary Cooper. And he does not look physically impressive, but he's intransigent, he's imperturbable, with one exception. And I think he's an interesting choice. He's worked with Ivo a lot, and so I think that's why I picked him. He didn't go out and get a Rourke, but I thought he did a good job. Both of them did, the actor and Ivo.
Well, Shoshana, it's been wonderful chatting with you about the making of the Fountainhead. It's a fascinating story, and I think some of your, at least one of your talks on this has been given at an objectivist conference. You sent me the text read, which was really wonderful to see. And I hope in some of your future scholarship, some of these stories will be surfaced in writing. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, and you could say that just as Ayn Rand had to make cuts, I had to make cuts to talk to you. But it's a good story.
Well, thanks so much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to never miss a video.